Hi. Do you feel safe? You're sitting down right now. You're likely in your home, somewhere you feel comfortable. But what if something wasn't quite right? Something just off. The lights, maybe a shade or two the wrong color. A cup or a glass, not quite where you left it. Hi, I'm Nathan. Welcome to the Media Hole. This is a monthly show in which we do an analysis on a piece of media, and together we learn something. Perfect Blue and Why We Tell Stories. Have you ever wondered, why do humans tell stories? There are thousands upon thousands of species of animals on this planet, and we're only one of them. So why don't cows paint? Why don't pigeons dance? And why don't house cats write screenplays? There needs to be some kind of further explanation. And that's what we're going to do today. Part 1. Humans, Stories. So, most of today's info comes from the book The Storytelling Animal by Jonathan Gottschall. Now, I'd highly recommend it. What we talk about today is about half that book, half my own shit. So if you do find any of that side of it interesting, I'd highly recommend it. It's from a psychologist's point of view. But it is like still somebody familiar with the arts and how they work, etc. Now there are some things I disagree with in the book, but yeah, I think the information in there is really good, and I think it's an easy breezy read. I got through it pretty quick. Before we go into full detail about why humans tell stories, I want to dispel a common misconception, one talked about in the book as well. And this is the idea that all of art is just escapism. That the only reason why you like what you like is because it gets you away from your shitty job, or your shitty life. And I think that's extremely limiting. The idea of stories having purpose, further than escapism, goes back to the earliest stories you can find. Religious and mythological stories all aim to moralize. They aim to explain why the world is the way that it is. They aim to give purpose to day-to-day life and instructions and ideals to its followers. This isn't to say that all religious stories are fictional. True stories and religious stories, despite however much you believe in them, are still kinds of stories. In fact, moralizing is in almost all stories. Most obviously in stories for children, but very frequently in stories for adults as well. Another rebuttal to the idea that stories are based on escapism is trouble. Stories are based on trouble. There are very few stories in which main characters don't go through horrible things. Why would it be an escape from your relatively safe and secure office job to watch a war movie where people are constantly at the risk of getting shot and dying and suffering horrible, horrible injury? Why would Game of Thrones have been one of the most popular television events in history? A show where characters constantly are dealing with politics and the looming threats of death and despair. Why would you listen to a true crime podcast to get over your day-to-day anxiety? It doesn't make any sense if it's just an escape, because a purely escapist piece of media would be one where the main character's always just you and they get what they want. They'd start each day walking down the stairs, hitting a home run, and just fucking tons of people. every show would be Sword Art Online, which is an anime about a character who's just good at everything and every girl wants to fuck him. But while that show is popular, it's not quite had the legacy of another Japanese anime, Neon Genesis Evangelion. That's a show about, yes, giant robots fighting, but also depression, anxiety, PTSD, daddy issues, war, the idea of living as a child but being ripped away of your innocence. It's a really rough watch, and yet it's critically and commercially successful, incredibly so. So the idea that we only consume art as escape is, frankly, just wrong. It's just wrong. So now that we're past that, let's get on to some real arguments. Jonathan Gottschall is an evolutionary psychologist, so in his book he offers a couple evolutionary explanations. So one of the first things he posits is a Darwinian sort of sexual selection, where the people who had the good stories could pass on their DNA, and that's why we've inherited storytelling. It's definitely potentially partially true, but I don't know if it's like a great explanation. Another theory in Gottschall's book is the cognitive play theory. This calls back to literary scholar Brian Boyd, who said, quote, "A work of art is like a playground of the mind," end quote. What this means is that experiencing and creating art is a form of exercise. It trains you how to think and feel. It's working out the same way that, lifting weights works out the muscles, I would assume. Or maybe they're a way to spread information. Stories can take a piece of knowledge and spread it further down the line while also being entertaining. Or maybe stories are what keeps us together. Maybe stories take us from individuals to families to a society. Those are all interesting, valid explanations for why we have stories. But if you're a very science-y type person and you're like, I don't want this wishy-washy bullshit, I want the science reason, let me tell you something. Science fucking sucks. The world is subjective. What we see and hear is subjective. What we think is subjective. What we feel is subjective. Abstract concepts like money and time are subjective. They're made up. They're not real. They're not objective. And yet, science tries to find objective truths about the world, which I don't necessarily think fits in most situations. So do you want to know science's explanation for stories, for art? It's that there is none. There's no explanation. It's a glitch in the system. In stories, our brains can relate to the characters. And so when we see somebody have a fight, we feel like we're in the fight. When we see somebody that's having sex, our brain releases the chemicals and we feel like having that sex. But we have those things without the dangers of doing them in the real world. This is very similar to the escapism idea. So I think that sucks. I think it's a sad way of looking at it. I think it's boring and I think it's untrue. So here's my theory. So my theory is what Gottschall calls in his book simulation theory. See, in psychology, there's a common term called modeling. And that's that you learn how to express yourself and how to behave and how to show yourself as a kid, but this still happens to adults, by seeing how other people do it and mimicking them. And it's something that you do both consciously and subconsciously. But all humans do it. It's a commonly known part of learning in psychology. There is also a lot of research going into the phenomenon of mirror neurons. What we found out in neuroscience, which is psychology but with surgery, that in your brain, when you see somebody experience an emotion, your brain makes you feel that way. If you look long enough at a picture of someone smiling, you might feel a little bit happier and want to smile. It's a commonly sort of seen reaction. Humans are really, really good at empathy. It's wired right in. And so the idea is that stories aren't just vehicles for you to experience the emotions of people doing exciting things, but without you experiencing that danger. A story like that still works that way. But a story that's dramatic, a story that's about, say, somebody experiencing the death of a loved one, a story about, people getting hurt, a story about sad, upsetting things, or beautiful romantic things, can be now not just that you're experiencing it vicariously, you're learning an acceptable reaction to that experience. And if it's an experience you've already had, you're experiencing, when seeing the art, a safer version of that. Stories are a safe space to experience negative emotions. That's why stories need trouble. That's why so many stories are things you wouldn't want to do, but why they're so enjoyable. You get to experience the excitement, the scariness, the sadness of a certain thing, and you learn how to bring that into your life without necessarily experiencing it to the same way. It's like a vaccination. It's a weaker version of the same sickness. It's a weaker version of the same strong negative emotions. So you're prepared when the real one comes along. You know how to react. Of course, that's not the only purpose of stories, especially on an individual level. That doesn't say anything for creating stories that are criticisms of existing unjust power structures. That doesn't say anything about stories that aim to dispel a lie. That stories that are, about shared history. But that's why I say in psychology, it's not that one thing is right and one thing is wrong. It's that there are several things that are all somewhat part of one giant truth. And that truth may also be, you guessed it, subjective. So there are many reasons to make art, and there are many reasons to experience it. In fact, the proof given for the last thing, the simulation theory, is that most people who engage with a lot of art, especially fiction, tend to be better in social situations, according to a couple studies actually, which is surprising to me because I'm terrible in social situations and I spend all my time, with art. But right now I'm sticking with simulation theory. I think it makes the most sense. And I think it provides an explanation for why we make art and why we experience it and why we enjoy it, that doesn't feel cynical, but doesn't feel overly warm and fuzzies. Part 2, Perfect Blue. You're probably asking, geez, Nathan, this is all very, very uninteresting. But you've been talking for about 97 minutes now, and you haven't talked at all about the movie Perfect Blue. When are you going to do that? And well, the answer is, no, I was going to talk about it now, if that's okay. Perfect Blue is a 1997 anime film directed by Satoshi Kon and based loosely on the novel Perfect Blue Complete Metamorphosis by Yoshikazu Takeuchi. It tells the story of Mima, a former pop idol with the group Cham, who quits that job to become an actress. When she announces this to the world, a rabid fan starts stalking her and murdering all whom he sees as making her impure. When she films a rape scene for a television series, Mima is traumatized and she loosens her grip between fantasy and reality. Perfect Blue is an absolute classic in the psychological horror genre and cemented the career of its director, Satoshi Kon, who would go on to have renowned work before ultimately passing away way too young. For my money, it's the best animated film of all time, and it's a must-watch for anybody who can stomach something that's meant to upset you. Okay, Nathan, you've summarized the movie lightly, so what's the point of the video? Well, I'll tell you the point. Because one of the main themes that Perfect Blue talks about is the type of story and the reasoning why that I haven't mentioned. Stories that we tell about ourselves. So yeah, that last kind of story that people tell is ones about themselves. The stories we tell about us. Whether that be your around the water cooler, how's your weekend, how's your family story, or down to what'd you do over the summer, so many other things. And these stories aren't always true. They're embellished. They're lies. We do that all the time about ourselves. And that can even be spread out into something like social media. And now I'm not one of those people who's going to go on videos and say, maybe it's a anti-social network. Because I think that's stupid. First of all, I'm relatively pro-social media. But secondly, I'm more talking about we want to put our best foot forward on, on Instagram we take pictures, we use filters, we show only the best pictures, we suck in our stomachs, we highlight the things we like, and we try to remove the things we don't. When we're on Twitter, we might want to look and sound smarter than we are, or funnier than we are. We might steal a joke, we might, etc., etc. The point is that Perfect Blue keys into that idea of the story you tell about yourself. And while it does predate social media by, nearly 15 years, it does have something similar. Because Perfect Blue is about somebody with a mild celebrity. It's somebody who's famous but not rich. Somebody who's known but not ubiquitous. And social media has turned that into a cottage industry. I mean, if you're watching this video, it's likely that you follow some sort of YouTube celeb or TikTok famous person or an Instagram model, right? This is someone who isn't a traditional old school celebrity. This is somebody who's like weirdly in between. And consider other jobs in the entertainment industry. Look at comic book writers and voice actors. These are people who are known, who are talented, who have fan bases, but yet many of them probably have to work a day job. It's not something permanent. So you can have these long lineups and still not be sort of huge. And that's at the core of Perfect Blue, is that person who is the lie, that person who's the persona. You put this different foot forward, but it's not you. So in the movie, Mima struggles with the version of herself that she puts out for others to see, gaining sentience and coming back at her. The version of you who's in all those pictures and all those tweets. The persona you've meant for yourself waking up and having to meet the real person. And that's scary. Mima's tension in the movie is both internal and external. She desperately wants to shed the heavy pretense that is being an idol. In Japan, the expectation for idols is ridiculous. They need to be innocent and virginal while also being heavily sexualized. And, people's careers, women's careers have been ruined by the public finding out that they have a boyfriend, or even them making normal sexual remarks. Mima's clearly in the business because she loves to sing, but this constant being in a persona is really making her unhappy. So she decides to become an actor, where certainly you are performing constantly, but once you get off camera, once you get off stage, you're no longer expected to keep up the lie. Acting does have its own set of expectations though, and Mima is pressured into doing this rape scene and participating in a nude photo shoot. In the eyes of Mimania and Mima's other self, this sort of thing is representative of how she's dirty, how she's, impure now. And just as an idea, I'd love to see sort of an interpretation of this film through feminist film theory. And if somebody has already done that, I'd love for you to send me it, because I think that'd be brilliant. But the video I'm making now is sort of coming from a different zone, but absolutely. Also, I do have a background in psychology, so my version coming from a sort of psychological standpoint, even though it's a different psychological standpoint than most interpretations of this, I think that works better for my background. So what I'm trying to say is this movie sort of owes a lot to Carl Jung's persona shadow theory, which, if my expectations are correct, that most of the viewers of this channel, like myself, are fans of the Persona series, Atlus's flagship RPG series. If so, you probably went, "Oh, I know what that is." In which case, yes, you very smart boy. Basically, the idea is people have this mask that they put on themselves, and it's a persona, and it's your personality and what people expect of you sort of as society to be a good person. It's the mask you put on and wear to be decent, and you sort of associate you with that mask, with that, effect. If you've ever been in retail and like myself have been dealing with an anxiety disorder, you'll know people go "Oh shit, I had no idea," because you put on the mask. You go, "Oh hey, blah, blah, blah," right? And then your shadow would be the part of you that's inside you that, has bad opinions, that, wants to come out and is sort of negative and is hateful and hurtful and antisocial in both senses of the term. And so essentially Mima is sort of battling this mask she's put on for years versus her true self, and trying to come to a head between that. In this video, I'm putting on a persona. I'm putting on the persona as the educated expert, and you'll know if I'm on the podcast, I put on a different persona, and if I'm hanging out with my friends and we're not being recorded, I have a different persona. And if you saw me in the grocery store, I'd probably be like, "Hey man, how's it going?" "Oh yeah, not too bad." "Oh hey, how's it going?" Right? It's a different persona, different masks, different versions of myself for different situations. And ultimately, we all do this, is what I'm trying to get at. And so, what makes Perfect Blue brilliant, and what makes humans tell stories, is the preservation of the true self, and is the preservation of the story. Countries tell stories to assert that their culture is superior, that their engineering is superior, that, this land that we have, we liberated it from terrible people who are already here, or one of many other stories we tell ourselves to let us sleep at night. What I'm trying to get at, I guess, is it's all subjective. Stories exist because they have forever, and we can look into it all we want. But ultimately, it's something in here. It's something inside of humanity that made us crave story. It's an important factor to life. And I guess I've been standing here for hours, and I wrote this video days ago over the course of a couple weeks. I did research because maybe my story is analyzing somebody else's. Or at least maybe that's what it is right now. Stories are comfortable and hard. Stories have meaning and thrive being meaningless. Life's complicated, I guess. But yeah, thanks for watching to the end. This has been the Media Hole. I hope you really liked it. If you'd like to see more of this, please like and comment and subscribe and check it out. We do new episodes of this monthly, and I also have a podcast, the Media Hole Podcast, where me and one or more of my friends talk about all sorts of shit. It's a great time. We upload on this channel at 1 p.m. every Monday, and on audio-only platforms at 7 a.m., also on Mondays. We're on Spotify, we're on Apple, we're on all sorts of shit. Please check us out. And yeah, have some discussion in the comments. One of the best things about art is that it's a constant conversation. It's always changing. And it's exciting how, going back to something can almost feel like something brand new all over again. So yeah, please check it out. And thank you so much for watching. Once again, take care. Oh yeah, by the way, next month's video, Parasite, a review and analysis of the historic Oscar winner.